Interesting study that is out now. And I guess, Natasha, if you're a parent and wondering about, what's the right thing to feed your child, what's not the right thing to feed your child, this is interesting because it seems like it kind of makes sense, right? Because the idea is, we know red meat, certainly as an adult, you want to limit the amount of red meat that you eat. I think we've all acknowledged that, right? And there are plenty of people now who are vegetarians. But what about children who eat a vegetarian diet?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, as you know, our 10-year-old announced just a couple of months ago that she has decided that she's vegetarian. And we've been trying to be supportive of that, but with some concern that her nutrition, that she's getting all the nutrients and the protein, everything that she needs as she's growing, right? So what I find a bit of a relief, more than a bit of a relief with this study, is that, in fact, it's been found that kids who eat a vegetarian diet have very similar measures of growth and nutrition to those children who eat meat. That said, researchers do have some recommendations. So let's talk to Dr. Jonathan Maguire. He is the lead author of the study, also a pediatrician at St. Michael's Hospital of Unity Health in Toronto. Thank you for your time today, Dr. Maguire.
Oh, you're welcome. Lovely to be here. Thanks for the time.
So tell us about these findings, because I personally am relieved, but also a little surprised that vegetarian and meat-eating kids are about equal, it seems.
Well, that's just it. I was really interested to hear your story about your child and being vegetarian, because that very same thing happened to me, and I got to thinking about that, and I thought, geez, I wonder if it's the right thing. So I happened to co-lead a large children's study in Canada called Target Kids, and I thought, well, you know what, let's figure this out. And so we tracked about 9,000 children over a period of about 10 years. And we followed them along. I think the average duration of follow-up was about 2.5 or 3 years. About 248 of those kids, parents told us they had vegetarian diets, and I wanted to see how those kids were doing relative to everybody else. And it turns out they're doing just fine. On average, children whose parents tell us they have vegetarian diets, they seem to be growing just the same. They seem to have the same markers of nutrition as children without vegetarian diets. So I think that's a really, really great news story for the many Canadian families whose parents choose or children choose to be vegetarian.
So I'm wondering then, if that's the case and the growth patterns seem to be pretty close to each other, do we then assume that as you get older in life that begins to change, or do we not have data to suggest that's in fact what happens?
Yeah, well, we followed kids to about age 8 years. But I'm really interested to see what happens later in life. I'm going to be around for a while, I hope, following these families, and I'm really so grateful that these families are hanging in with us as we follow their children. But I expect that we'll see health benefits for children who are vegetarian later on. I think that, that we found that the children's nutrition is the same is really reassuring, and that, based on other literature, we expect things to keep getting better with time. So I think it's a really good news story. All in.
I agree. Dr. Maguire, I'm wondering, you said you experienced this with your own child as well, or children, and part of the concern for me is that my child is of an age yet where she's not really into, like kidney beans and lentils or tofu. I can sneak some of it in some places, but most of the time she's eating lots of like tortellini with cheese and things like that. How concerned do we need to be that the kids are still getting enough protein and things that they need from lentils and kidney beans if they don't want to eat that stuff?
Yeah, well, I think you raise a really important point. And, in general, it is a little bit harder to get the same number of calories and the same amount of all the essential nutrients from vegetables as it is for diets that contain meat. So, for most children, that's not a barrier. And I think parents are going about it thoughtfully. And I really think that's why we're not seeing much difference. Because people are putting thought into it. However, when we looked very closely at the children who had undernutrition, so the very tiny children, the ones that are growing below the third percentile, okay, they seem to be having, those children who are vegetarian seem to be having a little more trouble with weight gain, which I think is sensible that, if you're adding something that makes it a little bit more difficult on top of a child who's already struggling may not be the wisest thing. And I think that's really consistent with the majority of families who seem to be doing this in a thoughtful, I think, quite positive way.
What are some of the things you might recommend, in a circumstance like that? Like I said, lots of pasta, lots of cheese and things like that. But what would be some of the recommendations that you might make to make sure the kids are getting all the nutrients they need?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the kinds of nutrients that tend to be harder for children to take in general tend to be a little bit more worrisome with vegetarian diets. So they include dietary calcium. So you have to think carefully about vegetables that contain calcium, dietary iron. So again, vegetables that contain dietary iron. We've seen that the children who are vegetarian, more of them tend to be on, iron supplements because their parents are concerned about iron intake, and as well as vitamin D if the children aren't consuming, fortified cow's milk.
Okay. What about when, and I'm going to guess at that age, or maybe this is still a bit young because you're talking about 8 years of age as the follow-through in the study. Your child sees someone eating a hot dog, they say they want to have something like that. The idea is, do you want to eliminate all meat from a diet? Is that what you're seeing some parents want to do? Or can you introduce some? How does it work?
Well, I think it's a great question because vegetarian diets come in many different stripes, and different people, categorize vegetarian diets entirely differently. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really whatever the individual feels comfortable with. Some people, for example, drink milk. Other people don't. Some people eat eggs. Other people don't. So I think it really depends on the individual. I think for the most part, people making vegetarian diet decisions based on whatever belief system they have, whatever they hold value, I think is really important. One of the criticisms we got on this paper was, in fact, how do you know these families were vegetarian? And I said, well, they told us they were vegetarian, and that's what matters most to me. And I think that's what matters most to most people.
I'm curious if you found that, and again, 8 years old, I'm going to guess that most of the time these are, as you said, vegetarian families. It's not necessarily the children making the decision for themselves, but I feel like we're going to be seeing more and more like my daughter who decided on her own.
Mine. That's right. I think so too, and I think children are becoming more health conscious. They're becoming more environmentally conscious, and I think when these kinds of trends emerge, it's up to us, us parents and researchers to say, hey, is this the right thing? And I think in this case, it looks like it's the right thing. So that's a great news story.
It's funny as you say this, I think to myself, if you're 6 years old, I can't imagine that I would have at some point gone to my parent and say, you know what, I'd like to do something good for the environment. I don't want to eat cows anymore.
Times have
just
changed.
Feed me. I know, but just feed me vegetables. How does this begin with? Do you have any idea? Where does it come from?
Well, I think kids are saying these things to parents. It's anecdotal evidence. I'm a pediatrician, and I hear the stories that families tell us. And kids are, I guess, they're getting it from school and in the media, and they want to do something good for the planet, and they feel this is a good way to do it. And so, my response back is, okay, well, then let's just do it in a thoughtful way. And, for people that aren't sure or they have questions, that's a good prompt to go see your healthcare provider and ask all those questions to make sure that the child's diet is nutritionally complete.
Well, can I just ask, though, with respect to a nutritionally complete diet, is there something you do want to watch out for if your child has decided to be vegetarian, with respect to what they're not eating or getting?
Well, like I said, I would just be careful with those foods that tend to be harder for those nutrients that tend to be harder for children to take at the best of times. They include dietary calcium, iron, and vitamin D. Those are really the three that are a little bit more difficult than many of the others.
And when in doubt, I guess, should we be consulting a pediatrician? Because I'm thinking, my daughter eats lots of broccoli. She eats lots of healthy stuff,
wonderful.
So I'm not too concerned. But would there be signs to look out for if your child was iron deficient or calcium deficient?
Well, I think, seeking help from your healthcare provider is always a wise thing if you're not sure. And one of the nice things that we have in Canada, one of the really important things is our primary healthcare providers watch the child's growth every time we visit them. So they're keeping an eye on how things are going. And if there's any uncertainty or things aren't working out, they're there to help you with that. So a good prompt to see your healthcare provider if you're not sure.
Who would have thought? I have to just say one more time, I'm very surprised by the findings of this study. I would not have thought that a meatless diet would have the same results as a diet with meat for kids in terms of growth and nutrition. Very interesting.
By the way,
thanks so much for your interest.
Is there a difference, just in asking, as Natasha said, that between boys and girls, any difference at all?
Yeah, we thought there might be, and actually tested that, and they seem to be about the same, which is, I think, also a really great news story.
All right. Interesting stuff. Dr. Maguire, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. The very best.
All right. There you go. So your daughter, the 9-year-old or 10-year-old vegetarian, is apparently on the right track. You're okay.
Thank goodness. I mean, she doesn't like when I say this, but she's a bit of a scrawny little thing. So, it is a concern. I'm always trying to make sure that she's eating enough and growing. But she's healthy. She likes to eat a lot of the things that she needs to be eating. So, I just got to figure out a way to get like lentils and chickpeas and stuff.
Someone just texted in as you're saying that you can buy like pasta infused with lentils and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and the patties. I have tried the patties. She didn't super dig those. And someone's saying tofu butter chicken. So she is coming around to like tofu, and she loves butter chicken. So that is an excellent suggestion. Thank you.